Randolph Scott truly hated him more than anyone. Randolph Scott, the man whose calm, stoic presence defined an entire era of Western cinema, wasn't born a Hollywood cowboy. He began life far from the dusty plains of movie lore. Born George Randolph Scott on January 23, 1898, in Orange County, Virginia, he came from a world of gentility and discipline. His father, George Grant Scott, was a respected textile executive. His mother, Lucille Crane Scott, carried the grace and refinement expected of Southern high society. Growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina, as one of 7 children, young Randolph absorbed the quiet confidence, manners, and moral strength that would later become the hallmark of his on-screen persona. He was the image of Southern dignity, composed, principled, and unwavering. Education came first in his household. He attended elite private schools before moving on to Georgia Tech and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He initially planned to follow in his father's footsteps in business or engineering. However, fate and Hollywood had other plans. Scott's path to stardom was not immediate. After returning home from World War I, where he had served with distinction as an artillery officer in France, Randolph Scott was no longer just a Southern gentleman. He was a man with purpose, molded by discipline and danger. In the early 1920s, while visiting California, he became captivated by the film industry that was blossoming there. With his tall, athletic build, striking features, and Southern charm, he caught the attention of several casting directors. He began his acting career humbly. He started from the very bottom. No fame, no fanfare, just long days as an extra, performing stunts and minor background work. Yet even in obscurity, he stood out. His determination, humility, and calm professionalism quickly earned him the respect of directors and casting agents. By the late 1920s, he had found steady work in Hollywood and soon transitioned into talking pictures, where his deep, resonant voice gave him a commanding presence. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, his career took flight. Scott appeared in everything from romantic comedies to adventure dramas, but it was the Western that carved his name into cinematic history. Films like The Last of the Mohicans, 1936, Western Union, 1941, and The Desperados, 1943, Scott became synonymous with the quintessential Western hero, stoic, honorable, and unyielding in the face of adversity. Unlike many stars of his time, he never fell victim to the excesses of Hollywood fame. He didn't chase scandal or headlines. Instead, he built a reputation for professionalism and quiet dignity. In the 1950s, his partnership with director Bud Boeticher would elevate his career even further. Together, they crafted a string of masterpieces: 7 Men From Now, 1956, Ride Lonesome, 1959, and Comanche Station, 1960, films that revealed a deeper side of Scott, a man haunted by loss but anchored by an unyielding sense of justice. These films, now regarded as masterpieces, portrayed Scott as a man of action, haunted by past regrets, yet guided by an unshakable moral compass. Scott's influence extended far beyond his final film appearance in Ride the High Country 1962, directed by Sam Peckinpah. In that film, he portrayed an aging lawman struggling to uphold his principles in a changing world, a role that mirrored his own graceful exit from Hollywood. When Randolph Scott decided to retire, he did so not out of decline, but out of quiet triumph. He walked away from Hollywood at the peak of his grace, choosing to end his career on his own terms, with dignity, poise, and the same quiet confidence that had defined him on screen. Away from the cameras, Scott proved just as shrewd in life as he was disciplined in art. He invested wisely in real estate and business, transforming his success into a fortune that made him one of the wealthiest actors of his generation. Yet, despite the millions, he remained grounded, a man of faith, family, and modest living, who never lost touch with the values instilled in him back in North Carolina. Randolph Scott married twice during his lifetime, and both unions revealed different facets of his personality, one marked by high society and the other by quiet domestic contentment. His first marriage, in 1936, was to heiress Marion DuPont, a woman born into a world of power, wealth, and prestige. She was the daughter of William DuPont Sr. and the great-granddaughter of Eleuther Irénée DuPont de Nemours, the French-born chemist who founded the DuPont dynasty, one of America's most powerful industrial empires. Through Marion, Scott stepped into a life that couldn't have been more different from his own upbringing. She owned Montpelier, the historic Virginia estate once home to President James Madison, and had turned it into one of the finest horse-breeding estates in the country. Far from a society ornament, Marion was an independent, strong-willed woman, a skilled equestrian and philanthropist who preferred the company of horses to Hollywood glitz. Curiously, before their marriage, Scott had actually served as best man at her wedding to another man, Virginia sportsman George Somerville. It was an odd twist of fate that later found them together, suggesting that their affection had grown slowly, perhaps even unexpectedly, from friendship into love. However, despite the glamour that surrounded their union, the marriage between Scott and Marion DuPont was not destined to last. Their worlds, though both privileged, were starkly different. Scott's life was anchored in California, where his rising fame demanded long hours and constant dedication. Marion's heart, meanwhile, belonged to her horses and the aristocratic traditions of the East Coast. Their marriage became one of distance, not just physical, but spiritual. By 1939, only 3 years after their lavish wedding, they quietly divorced. There were no scandals, no bitterness, only a graceful parting of paths. Though they had no children, Marion continued to use the name Marion DuPont Scott for the rest of her life, holding on to it until her death in 1983, nearly half a century later. This enduring choice reflected perhaps a lingering fondness or respect between the two, or simply her desire to preserve a name that had come to define her public identity within the world of horse racing and philanthropy. After several years of bachelorhood, Randolph Scott found lasting happiness in his second marriage. In 1944, he married Patricia Stillman, a young actress 21 years his junior, whose beauty and gentle nature offered him the peace he had long been seeking. Unlike his first wife, Patricia had little interest in society or celebrity. She left the screen soon after their marriage, dedicating herself to home and family, and to the man who, after decades of chasing dreams and dusty sunsets, had finally found his way home. Randolph Scott's second marriage could not have been more different from his first. Where his union with Marion DuPont had been shaped by social circles and circumstance, his life with Patricia Stillman was built on something far more genuine: love, trust, and quiet devotion. The couple settled into a comfortable and enduring domestic life, shunning much of the Hollywood spotlight that so often consumed celebrity marriages of the era. By 1950, their home grew even warmer with the arrival of 2 adopted children, a daughter, Sandra, and a son, Christopher. For a man whose on-screen persona was defined by rugged stoicism and unshakable strength, Scott proved in private to be surprisingly tender. Friends often spoke of the gentle way he interacted with his children, the steady kindness in his voice, and the affection he carried for Patricia, who was not just his wife, but his partner in every sense. Away from the bright lights of the film industry, the Scotts lived a serene life, splitting their time between their home in Beverly Hills and their ranch near Santa Barbara, where Randolph could indulge his lifelong love of horses and the open countryside. Through this enduring partnership, Scott found the kind of stability and peace that had eluded him in his first marriage. But beyond the calm of domestic bliss, Hollywood still whispered about one thing: the simmering tension between Randolph Scott and another titan of the Western world, John Wayne. On screen, both men embodied the essence of American masculinity: strong, stoic, and fearless. To fans, they were two sides of the same coin, kindred spirits in cowboy hats. But behind the scenes, their relationship told a different story. While fans often assumed that two such similar stars would share mutual respect, the truth was far more complex. Randolph Scott, the refined Southern gentleman with impeccable manners and a quiet sense of dignity, harbored a deep and lasting dislike for John Wayne. Their differences went beyond professional rivalry. They were rooted in personality, values, and the way each man viewed the art of acting and the code of the cowboy. Randolph Scott once said bluntly about John Wayne, "I never cared for the man. He represented everything in Hollywood I didn't admire." Scott had always taken pride in his restraint, both on and off the screen. His performances were measured, deliberate, and quietly powerful. He didn't need to shout or swagger to convey strength. John Wayne, by contrast, was the embodiment of bravado, loud, boisterous, and always commanding attention. "Wayne was a showman, and I was a craftsman," Scott remarked. Wayne's brand of heroism felt theatrical, almost exaggerated. Scott saw him as a product of Hollywood mythmaking rather than the disciplined storytelling that he valued. Behind the polished image of the Duke, Scott saw what he called a salesman's version of the West, focused more on image than on integrity. Their professional paths occasionally crossed, though they never faced off directly on film. Yet the undercurrent of competition was undeniable. Both were leading men in westerns throughout the 1940s and 1950s, and producers often compared their box office draws. The studios tried to pit us against each other, Scott recalled. But the truth is, we never needed to be compared. We were playing two different games. Scott's films often carried moral subtlety, internal struggle, and reflection, while Wayne's thrived on spectacle and patriotic fervor, an approach Scott found shallow. I played men who questioned their choices, he said. Wayne played men who never questioned anything. Beyond artistic differences, their personalities clashed. Scott was calm, gentlemanly, and rarely boastful. Wayne, in contrast, was loud, outspoken, and often dominated conversations with conservative political views and bombastic confidence. He liked to talk politics and war, Scott once remarked. Two things I never believed should be glorified in a saloon or on a soundstage. Wayne's self-assured patriotism, expressed in black-and-white moral terms, irritated Scott, who believed life, like the frontier, was full of gray areas. Their opposing temperaments meant that meetings often ended in tense silence or cutting remarks. Personal slights widened the rift. On several occasions, Scott reportedly felt disrespected by Wayne's offhand comments about his acting style. Wayne once called Scott too pretty to play a real cowboy, an insult Scott never forgot. Scott believed authenticity came from quiet strength, not loud posturing. In Hollywood circles, it was known that Scott would politely leave a party if Wayne arrived. While mutual friends like Gary Cooper and Joel McCrea were often caught in the middle, careful not to praise one in front of the other. Perhaps the deepest root of Scott's dislike came from what he saw as hypocrisy. Despite portraying fearless heroes on screen, Wayne had avoided military service during World War II, a decision quietly resented by many in Hollywood. Scott, who had supported the war effort in other ways and respected soldiers throughout his life, saw this as a moral failing. I didn't judge men who stayed home, he said, but I couldn't stomach those who pretended to fight wars on screen after refusing to serve in one. To Scott, this contradiction defined Wayne, a man more concerned with appearances than principles. Despite his dislike, Scott never publicly attacked or sought to tarnish Wayne's legacy. His disdain remained private, revealed only in candid interviews later in life. I respected his success, Scott admitted, but I never respected the man. The two Western legends remained professional, rarely crossing paths after the 1950s, but their silent feud became part of Hollywood lore. Both men left a profound mark on the Western genre, Scott through quiet dignity and moral complexity, Wayne through larger-than-life heroism. Ironically, their contrast may have kept the genre balanced. Yet in Randolph Scott's heart, there was no affection, no camaraderie, only deep and abiding dislike. John Wayne, he once said coldly, was the last man I'd ride the range with. Randolph Scott died of heart and lung ailments in 1987 at the age of 89 in Beverly Hills, California. He was interred at Elmwood Cemetery in Charlotte, North Carolina. He and his wife Patricia had been married for 43 years. She passed away in 2004 and is buried next to him. Their mid-century modern home was demolished in 2008. The Randolph Scott papers, including photographs, scrapbooks, notes, letters, articles, and houseplans, were donated to the UCLA Library Special Collections, becoming a valuable record of the life and career of one of Hollywood's greatest Western legends.